Welcome to Dark Conduit, where shadows whisper and the unseen is brought into the eerie light of your screen. Here, we delve into the depths of horror and suspense, narrating tales that will chill your spine and haunt your dreams. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. Welcome to the nightmare.
We're thrilled to have you.
Cult Yardsale. The few people that I've told this story always laugh it off or tease me, but I swear on my life that it's true. I have always loved yard sales. In the summer when I have a free day, I'll often just drive around all day, looking for different yard sales, wasting my day away. About 2 years ago, I was doing this, just driving around looking for yard sale signs, gradually going further out into the rural country and enjoying the scenery, having fun getting lost on the backcountry roads. You can sometimes find great yard sales doing this. I saw a yard sale sign off of the road, next to a big rock with something religious carved into it like churches have. I can't for the life of me remember what it said. God's Haven? Something religious, I can't remember. Anyways, I figure it's probably got some good stuff if it's a church organization, so I decide to go. I turn my new Jeep down the long, narrow gravel driveway, and the trees open up to a clearing with a really beautiful white house. They have long tables spread out with folded clothes, kids' toys, etc., but nothing I was really interested in. There are probably 30 people milling about on the property, but they are all wearing these gray jumpsuits. Okay, the only other person that seems to be browsing through their wares was this old man, whose truck was also parked there, but we were the only ones, save for gray jumpsuits. The woman at the makeshift table with the money box on it begins talking to me as I'm preparing to leave. I stride over to her for a friendly chat, and I notice that behind the house, there are probably 10 or so small gray buildings that gray jumpsuits are going in and out of. After some casual chat, she notices me staring. Yes, we all live here. It's great. Hey, would you like to come in and learn more? She had this crazy light in her eyes, and I attempted to mumble an excuse when she nodded at 3 guys who had been arranging stuff on the tables, moving tables, etc. And they all came to stand around me. Really, come inside. We preach peace and the word of God. You'd really like it. She took my hand and kind of started tugging me towards the house, all the while these guys are following, and I'm making weak protests. Then, the old man who's been browsing paperbacks seems to take notice and comes up. He looks at the woman and says, "Sorry, ma'am. We both really gotta be going. I don't think she's interested." The woman looks shocked, but lets go, and the guys step back. He's a scrawny old guy, and I'm a petite woman, but that badass old man grabs my arm and hustles me over to my Jeep. As I'm thanking him and yelling back to the people to have good luck with their yard sale, he mutters in a low voice, "You really need to get out of here." My hands are shaking. All the gray jumpsuits are just turned and silently staring at us, and I'm fumbling with my keys. The old man stands by my rolled down window, and I fumble to start the car and try to back out of the narrow gravel driveway. I tried to do a 3-point turn, but my car slides down in the gravel into a shallow ditch next to the driveway, and I'm panicking. "Just take it easy, put it in 4-wheel drive," he coaxes. "I don't know how," I whisper frantically. I'd only had the Jeep for a couple of months at that point, and I had never had a car with 4-wheel drive before. I figured I'd learn eventually. He calmly told me how to do it and stood there guiding me as I finally got the Jeep to stop sinking into the gravel and drove the hell out of there. I yelled a thank you to him, and he nodded before getting into his truck. I told my family and a few friends, who kind of laughed and brushed it off, saying they hadn't heard of any cults in this area, probably just a church sale at one of the members' houses. I've driven around that area a little bit after the event, but haven't seen the rock sign thing again. Though honestly, that day I drove pretty deep into rural country, had no idea what road or where I was. I just knew the general direction to drive in, to get back to a main road and eventually find my way home. I think I may have escaped a cult that is kind of off the radar, but I swear to God it happened, and thank God that old man helped me get out of there. burning recliner and dead cow. Hey guys, new here so be gentle. I actually have several stories to share if you're interested, all true and all creepy. I'll start with this particular story because it haunts me to this day, over 20 years after it happened. I was about 21 or 22 when this happened. I was in the military at Sil and didn't know it, but Desert Storm was right around the corner. At the time, I lived in south-central Oklahoma on the outskirts of a small town called Duncan. I was helping a friend round up some cattle that got out because someone had run across a T-section and went through their fence. It tore 2 posts down and left a 30-foot section open for the cattle to get out. We'd already found most of the cattle and were missing another 3 or 4, so we were out at 1 a.m. on dirt bikes trying to find them before someone hit one of them and sued his father. My friend and I went east, and the other guys went north and south. One thing you need to understand about Oklahoma is that most of it farmed, either cattle or crops. It is also divided into 1-mile sections for the most part. In other words, the roads all run north and south or east and west and intersect at 1-mile intervals. If you ask directions for something out in the country, you are more likely than not to get instructions that include go 3-mile sections north and then 2-mile sections west. The area at this time was sparse and there weren't many homes. We didn't know how long the hole had been in the fence. My friend's father only checked the fence because he was missing livestock. They owned the entire mile section and a good portion of the adjoining mile section. The hole in the fence was on the east side of their land, at the furthest distance from their house. They checked the fence for such holes on a weekly basis, so the hole could not have been more than 2 days old. James and I were riding on these old, dusty, dirt roads with battery-powered spotlights to both show the way and to search for cattle. We'd stop at any of the million small wooden bridges and look to see if there were any cows down by the water. Our plan was to go out 10 miles and then go over a mile section and drive back 10 miles until we'd gone a total of 10 miles out and 10 miles over. Then we were to do it all again, but on the north-south roads instead of the east-west roads. If you were to plot it on a map, it would be a 10 by 10 grid. We had been at it since before 9 p.m., just as it was getting dark, and we'd already gone 10 miles out and about 3 miles over. I need to mention at this point that there are some mile sections that are not divided by roads, and you have to turn one way or another at a T intersection. If that happens, we always took the road that went in our general direction of travel. If we were traveling east and came to a T, and we'd already checked the road north of us, then we'd head to the south a mile and then head east again. Occasionally, an old farmer would pass away and leave his land to relatives who had no interest in farming, and the land would be put up for sale or just left alone for years. When this happens and the roads aren't used as much, nature reclaims them, and you're usually left with a dirt road with weeds and grass growing on it, or you're left with little more than an improved trail, usually 2 ruts with overgrown weeds and Johnson grass, and occasionally a tree. We were on one of the rutted roads, headed south to the next intersection, where we'd turn east again. The land here was too hilly for cultivation and had been left alone for at least the last 30 years. We were both familiar with it as we hunted and fished there. This mile section and the next 2 were basically wild. At the end of the dirt trail would be a T intersection, but the west side was fenced and the only option was to turn east again. At the end of this mile section, the road was a dead end, but we had to check it and then double back. We just made the turn back to the east when we saw something burning over the next rise. Grass fires are extremely dangerous and can get out of control in minutes. As we topped the rise, we saw that the fire was actually in the middle of the dirt road. When we got to it, we found that it was a recliner that was burning, a blue La-Z-Boy recliner. We stopped and threw some dirt on it and finally got it extinguished. James and I were wondering what kind of an idiot would do this and how strange it was to be in the middle of the road just burning. Satisfied that the fire was out, we got back on our bikes and idled past the recliner toward the end of the mile section, still a quarter of a mile in the distance. We found one of their cows at the bottom of the rise, about 100 feet down the road. It was laying half in and half out of the road. Its throat had been cut, and it was laying there with its eyes opened and tongue hanging out. There was blood everywhere. As we were looking at it and trying to figure out what happened, James said, "Hey, look at this," and showed me where the blood had dripped from the cow to about 10 feet away from it. There were shoe prints of blood in the road. It was just part of a shoe print, but you could tell that it was a shoe print. We found 2 more when we looked more diligently. At this point, the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and it was suddenly a very cool evening. I looked at James, and his eyes were as big as saucers. He thought something spooky was happening too. We talked about going back, but we knew that we'd be shamed if we didn't see if there was anything else. We finally decided to walk the bikes the rest of the way to the dead end, just in case there was someone there. We didn't want them to hear the engines. We began walking the last quarter-mile or so to the dead end. It was at the base of the last hill, and we just started heading up it on the other side. My heart was going about 200 miles an hour, and I had cotton mouth so bad that it was almost impossible to swallow. Then I noticed that someone had stuck paper plates to the barbs of the wire of the fence. We looked, and there were plates stuck to the top strand of wire on both sides of the road. It started about 50 feet behind us and continued up and over the hill. They were evenly spaced about 5 feet apart. As our gaze followed the row of paper plates up to the top of the hill, James suddenly said, "There's another fire," and it was at that moment that I could smell it. But what I smelled wasn't that normal smoky smell. It was as though someone had added incense to it. I asked James if he could smell that, and he could. I told him that I didn't like this at all. I was okay with losing face in front of our friends and his dad and brothers. I was ready to go. He agreed with me, but said that we had to see what was burning. We were both whispering, and we were both shaking so much that our voices quavered. We started up the hill again, and I was thinking with every step that we were going to be seriously killed or worse. As we got to the top of the hill, one of the paper plates blew off the fence and skittered behind us, making both of us jump, and it was all I could do not to scream. After we saw what it was, I started to laugh it off, but James shushed me and told me to listen. We could hear voices. As we topped the hill and were able to see the bottom where the road stopped, we saw a group of about 10 people all standing around another recliner that was burning. They had their backs to us, and they were passing a big pitcher around. From our vantage point, we couldn't actually see what was in the pitcher, but the slit throat of the cow haunted my thoughts. They would each take a mouthful and spit it into the fire. This went on until the pitcher was empty. The entire time, they were all saying something in unison. We could only understand an occasional word. They changed their tones in a rhythmic manner with an emphasis on the last word. I can remember hearing here and there and beseech and father. James and I stood there on top of that hill like a couple of idiots, our mouths hanging wide open and actually scared stiff. After a minute or two, they would repeat whatever it was, all the while passing that pitcher and spitting into the fire. There was a small camp table set up on the side and a little behind them. After the last of the liquid was gone, a man turned and sat the pitcher on the table and picked up what looked like a large loaf of bread. Just as he was turning back to the fire, he evidently saw us. I am sure that we made a nice silhouette sitting there at the top of the hill. He screamed, "Hey!" and dropped the loaf of bread and started running in our direction. The others turned and immediately followed him. That was all the encouragement that we needed. It was time to go. We turned our bikes around. James got his started on the first kick, but I somehow managed to get myself off balance, and when I kicked, the bike fell on its side with me. By this time, I was near panic and was breathing in raspy short breaths. I picked the bike up again and tried to start it, but it didn't start. I thought about running, but we were out in the middle of nowhere. I finally started pushing the motorcycle down the other side of the hill and jumped on it. It seemed like it took forever to get enough speed, but I popped the clutch and it started. James was waiting at the corner of the intersection to make sure that I was coming, and we headed for his house, going way too fast for safety, especially in the dark. When we finally got back to his house, we told his dad what we'd seen. His dad called a couple of friends, and they all loaded up in their trucks with enough weapons to start a small war. James and I sat with his dad and told him where to turn. His dad kept asking us questions on the way. What were they doing? Why was there a chair on fire? They cut the cow's throat. How many were there? What did they look like? What were they driving? That last question stumped us. We hadn't seen any cars or trucks. The road was the only way in or out, and there was a creek that ran on the back side of the end of that particular road, so they couldn't have gone that direction. How had they gotten there with two recliners? When we got to that last stretch of road, the headlights found the spot where the recliner had been sitting. It was gone. We could all see where the road and surrounding grass was burned, but the recliner was not there. As we got closer, James noticed that the cow was gone too. I hate to admit, but I was getting scared all over again. I was afraid that his dad would tell us that it was our imagination and not believe us. When we got closer to the burnt spot in the road, Buster, James' dad, noticed the chair off in the ditch on the left side of the road. Then I noticed the cow on the other side. It was also in the ditch. The paper plates were all gone. Buster got out to look at the cow with the other men. They stood there talking and shaking their heads for what seemed like 10 minutes before getting back into the trucks. We continued toward the hill. The ruts made by spinning motorcycle tires were easily seen, but there was no fire on the other side of the hill. We all went down to where the other recliner had been burning, but it and the camp table were gone. You could see where someone had walked around the charred area and covered it with dirt. After we left, James saw a paper plate about 50 feet on the other side of the fence. Buster called the county sheriff when we got home, and by that time it was daylight, and we went out again with the sheriff and a deputy. When we got back to the road, the first recliner and the cow were gone, but you could still see where something had been on fire, and there was still blood on the road and in the grass. James showed them the shoe prints we'd seen. At the bottom of the hill, you could still see the charred area where the second recliner had been burning, and the deputy found little scuff marks where the table had been sitting. At the end of the road, you could see where the top strand of the fence had been tugged down and wrapped around the lower strand so someone could crawl over it. You could also see where the grass and weeds had been trampled, providing a fairly easy trail to follow. We found a woman's tennis shoe on the other side of the creek. You could see where someone had climbed up the bank on the far side of the creek. We followed the trail all the way across the field up to the next dirt road. Again, the top wire was wrapped around the next lower wire, and there was a piece of red bandana-looking material caught in it. There were marks on the road where 2 or 3 different cars had spun their tires when they left. Buster also found a large piece of glass that had blood on it. Buster filed a report for the missing cow. They'd found 4 more cows in the opposite direction from where me and James had gone. They never found the recliners or the missing cow. The sheriff called a few days later and told Buster that the blood on the glass was human and not bovine. It was his guess that the pitcher broke and someone cut their hand while carrying it back to their vehicles. 2 weeks after that, there was a huge scare in our community about some cult that had promised the area at large that they were going to sacrifice a blonde-haired virgin girl and boy. Buster always said that it was just someone running their mouth after hearing about our incident. It was all anyone talked about that summer. Buster also said that he sure liked to know what happened to that cow. Sorry it was so long. I got chill bumps while remember all of this. This happened in 1988-89, and I still think about it. As our journey through the shadows comes to a close, we want to extend a heartfelt thank you for watching. Your presence illuminates the darkest corners of our tales, and it's you, our brave viewers, who make Dark Conduit truly alive. Remember, if tonight's tale has left a whisper in your ear or a shadow in your heart, support us by hitting that like button and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Every like, comment, and share helps us keep the lanterns burning and the stories flowing. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to become a permanent traveler in our eerie adventures. Until next time, keep the lights dim and your curiosity alight. Thank you, and good night from Dark Conduit.